Hey everyone, welcome back to Trading Fours, Laurier's one and only jazz radio show. Today we've got a very special guest, saxophonist and composer Jesse Ryan. I had the chance to sit down with him last week and speak to him about his new album Bridges, and we touched on many topics, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. So without further ado, let's hear a song from Jesse's new album, and then we'll go right into the interview. This song is called Seeds. All right. Thanks
All
for
right.
coming on this morning, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Of course, my pleasure.
All right. So let's get started and talk a little bit about your new album, Bridges. So
Sure.
Bridges is your debut recording on Fwé Culture, which, as you
Yes.
describe in your website, is the corporate umbrella for all of your musical and creative projects and services as a recording artist, an arranger slash producer, and a graphic designer.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of stuff. And tell me a bit about
Yes.
how. Can you tell me a bit about how Fwé Culture came to be?
Yeah, sure. Well, the word "fwé" is comes from the language Creole, which is like
Mhm.
colloquial French, spoken in different islands of the Caribbean, and it means fresh or new,
Oh,
and
interesting.
um, so it means like new or fresh culture,
Yeah.
and so the idea behind it is that I think one of the things that has become sort of like part of my like personal DNA
Hmm.
is like the pursuit of always trying to keep evolving, whether it's by learning new things, um, just trying to be a better person every day, really. And
Yeah.
so that idea um, is also linked to the idea of that I've had an opportunity to. And I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and I've had the opportunity to study in the States in Boston, and then I now live in Canada. So it's that idea of cultures being mixed to
Yeah.
form something new.
Yeah. With those with those bridges.
Bridges, exactly. So that's kind of the idea behind it. I finally registered the business this year,
Oh, that's
and
wonderful. Congrats.
during thank you so much, man. During the quarantine,
Hmm.
um, had some downtime. I had time to reflect and just kind of like have some vision for what I wanted to do because you know I'm always creating things, whether it's music, art, stories,
Right. Yeah.
other things. And so I needed to figure out a business model
Right.
to be able to pursue the things I wanted to do creatively, but do it in a sustainable way that's also profitable, right?
Yeah. And not in a way that like keeps you down to one thing.
Exactly.
Because like in reading about Fwé culture, what I got was that like if you're making an album one day, you want to be able to put it out there, but if you're doing graphic design, you don't want to have it all split up and separated. All of it is you, so it's
Yes.
all in one place.
Yes.
That's
And
that's
and
the sort of vibe I got from it, at least.
exactly, yeah. And it's just starting out, and my desire is to really also build a design agency within the brand. So
Wow.
working with other graphic designers, which I kind of started to do this year. So my role will kind of move away from just actually doing the design to more like doing creative directing on the
Wow. Yeah.
design.
So it's like
So
someone who I saw doing that recently was actually Kendrick Lamar. He
mm,
recently started up this thing that he sort of described as this design. I'm not sure what he called it, but it's called PG Lang, and
okay,
it's interesting because everyone's asking him, where's the new album, where's the new album. He's like, well, here's this creative project company that I just came up with. So it's
great,
interesting
great,
seeing the
great.
paths that people want to take it, but I'm all for it, man, because if that's how you know I think that people expressing themselves in the creative way that works the best for them is the way that you're going to get the best out of people. If we keep someone constricted, they're not going to be able to show themselves out for the best parts of themselves. So i'm
Yes,
i'm 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 glad to hear that you're doing this sort of thing, because I think it seems really good, and I'll definitely be following it into the future.
thank you so much, man.
So you grew up in Port of Spain, the country of
Yes,
Trinidad and Tobago. And in
yes,
doing a bit of research before this interview, I came to learn about your grandfather, Clifton Ryan, better
yes,
known in the Calypso world as the Mighty Bomber. So,
yes.
how would you say that your upbringing and your family background and a family of music influenced your forays into the music world?
Yeah, I mean, I was always around music growing up.
Mhm.
Um, so my dad wasn't a professional musician, but he played guitar and he sang in church, and my
Right.
and he sang with his brothers and sisters in calypso tents and so on when they were growing up, and so on because of my grandfather.
Mhm.
And so music was always part of my family heritage. But I had an interesting experience growing up in that, when you go to an aquarium, you can see all the fish, but there's the glass that's stopping you from actually touching them and interacting.
Separating you.
Yeah. And so I also grew up in the church. And so a lot of times, back in the 90s when I grew up, calypso, steel pan, and some other style forms of folk music were considered secular. And so I wasn't necessarily allowed to be very involved in certain aspects of culture, even though it was all around me.
Yeah, it was kind of like the glass in the aquarium is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think what happened is that as I grew up and I got more involved in music, there was like this deep connection to those folk forms, but it was kind of like unexplored.
Right.
And so what I wanted to do as I, discovered jazz and wanted to study and play that music, I also wanted to keep that connection and explore some of like my own like ancestral DNA. So and I'm using the word ancestral DNA because with the album Bridges that's coming out, I feature a form of drumming from the island of Tobago, which is the smaller of the two islands.
Yeah, the tambourine drumming.
Tambourine drumming, yeah. And there are various forms of drumming traditions from all around the world that kind of feature those three frame drums. So there's tambourine drum in Tobago, there's plena from Puerto Rico.
Oh wow!
Which one of my favorite saxophonists, Miguel Zenon, he put out a project called Esta Plena, or This Is Plena, a couple of years ago.
I got to write that down. I got to listen to this.
Yeah, man, it's amazing. And then also there's a form of that music on the island of Grenada, which is where my grandfather was born and he grew up most of his life, which is where he got the name the Mighty Bomber. He won a calypso competition there, and they said that he rained bombs on his competition, so they called him the Mighty Bomber.
Yeah, I read about that.
Yeah. So so that desire to sort of like break down the glass and engage is what has shaped my approach to music. I mean, and I think sometimes when we talk about bridging styles and all of that, it's kind of presented in a novel way, like if I'm doing something that's new, but this has been done. There are people from Trinidad, like the Clive Zanders, Michael Lauchiton, we call him Ming, and a host of other musicians, Ralph Robertson, late Ralph Robertson, musicians who have fell in love with jazz and other Black American forms of music, and been fusing them with folk forms and calypso. So.
Yeah, and again, that's nothing new in terms of like I've heard jazz fusion. I'll say jazz fusion for lack of a better term. From different countries. Just recently, I was listening to some Cambodian jazz fusion, which I found was really interesting. But even though it might have been done before, there's going to be a stark difference between the Trinidad that you express and the Trinidad that someone else expresses. So ultimately, you can hear it from you can hear 5 different Trinidadian jazz musicians, but they're all going to have their own way of showing their ancestral worldview, like you said, and that's what's interesting.
I'm glad that you said that, because I had this discussion with some folks before. There's no one Caribbean identity. There's no one Trinidadian identity. And so I remember a couple of years ago living in Toronto, a couple friends from Trinidad, they had a layover flight, I think, to like BC or something. And so they were hanging out in my apartment, and we had sort of like a heated argument about some topic. I can't even remember what it was. And we had all of these different point of views on the same topic as Trinidadians. And I thought, we were happy to connect with each other in Toronto because, hey, somebody from home, let's get together. There's that camaraderie. But then we sit down in a place together, and then there's all of these differences, between us. So it just kind of made me aware of that. And so you're totally right, and so I'm happy to share my own unique point of view and happy for opportunities to do that.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of this saying. I'm Jewish, and there's this saying that like you've got 4 Jews in one room and you've got 5 opinions. So it just reminds me a bit of that.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask this. I'm a saxophonist myself, and
nice.
I want to ask you, who are some of your idols on the saxophone? Like who did you want to be like growing up? I know it's sort of a tough question because there's probably a bunch.
I think I'd have to take that in different seasons of my life. So when I just started playing the saxophone, I think when your aunties and uncles and different people hear that you pick up the saxophone, they say, oh, you should check out this person. And they kind of say their favorite people. So the people that kind of made me initially want to become a better musician were people like Francis Prime, who's a Trinidadian saxophonist, Frankie Francis. Frankie Francis actually played with my grandfather. He's passed away. I think it's like 2005. But he was like one of like the staple saxophone players back in the day, playing on all the calypso recordings, arranging horn parts and all of that. So
yeah, he would play with like Young Killer and the Mighty Wrangler and stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Names like Roy Cape, Arturo Tappan. Arturo Tappan is from Barbados, and so those are some of the names that in my immediate environment I thought, oh, these are the guys that I have to look up to,
Yeah.
And then as I grew on, developed, I really fell in love with Kirk Whalum. So he played with Whitney Houston for many years. The saxophone solo on I Will Always Love You, and that's Kirk Whalum playing that. So he was kind of like the bridge for me from moving from that world of like smooth pop approach to playing jazz to sort of more of a modern or traditional approach to playing jazz. So because I think he is a bridge, between those two worlds, because he's played pop music, he's played smooth jazz, but he's also like a serious jazz musician as well. And I'm saying that with serious in terms of his the work that he put into really dig into the tradition and really understand it, its roots. So and then of course as I transitioned, guys like Kenny Garrett. I used to fall asleep, listening to Kenny Garrett, and Miguel Zenon. I think as I developed more, I went back to some of the older guys. Like Bird. For a long time, I kind of stayed away from those old recordings, and that's exactly where I am right now, just digging into Bird.
Interesting. Yeah, I think every saxophonist has their Bird phase. I think it's just like a thing that happens to every saxophonist at some point.
Yeah,
I've been on my end. I was always a huge Coltrane fan. When I first discovered jazz, it's like one of the first people who I started listening to was Coltrane, and it just blew me away. And since then, I've just been bridging out and trying to figure out and listen to as much new jazz as possible. And when I came across your album, I listened to it. I'm like, I gotta get this guy, sit this guy down for an interview, because it was so interesting to me. And on that note, I wanted to talk about some of the music itself. So first, I wanted to talk just about the section at the end of the song "Seeds," where the rhythm starts switching back and forth between the swing rhythm and this other one whose name I don't know. Because the first time I heard that, it like genuinely like stopped me in my tracks. I was like, I need to know how the hell he did this, because this is amazing. So could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so the rhythm is called Abaquois.
Okay. How do you spell that? I need to write that down.
I'm probably gonna butcher it, so I'm not gonna try right now. I could probably send it
All good.
after.
I can probably find it at some point. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
What is that rhythm like? What's it about?
Yeah, so it's from Cuba. It's coming from that tradition, and so there's this long-standing tradition in jazz, of
Mhm.
like recordings like Night in Tunisia and others, where one section is in swing, one section is in like a Latin sort of
Yeah,
groove.
like Dizzy and Chano Pozo used to play.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? And so that's kind of what I was going for.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, that that approach, that compositional approach, is embodies the idea of bridging cultures.
Yeah.
Of course, there was a large Cuban community in New York at the same time that jazz was developing, and so
Mhm.
there was like this cross pollination and of the style. So, um, and even to look at like the English speaking Caribbean, jazz harmony, forms, melodies really influenced calypso as
Mhm.
well, and vice versa. So
Yeah,
I
it's like
think
it's like a trading of knowledge almost.
exactly, and cultures.
Yeah.
And so for me, that idea of switching grooves, and it's become like a staple thing within the jazz tradition,
Yeah.
and it embodies the idea of bridges. So one so that exists on the head in and so on, and then in the solo sections. But at the end, where we go into that abaquois thing, I just wanted to take it even further.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, the typical way a tune is presented a lot of the times is that you stay the melody, there's some solos, and you come back
Mhm.
to the head.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to find another way to restate the head. And so all we're doing is doing some the abaquois rhythm is kind of like the bed, um, right? And we're just doing some stop times over that.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
honestly, I wish I knew more about music theory, because most of the time when I hear this kind of stuff, I'll listen to it. I'm like, man, that sounds good. I wish I knew how to do that. But yeah, it's really cool talking about the mixing of traditions, because I really think that's what helps to like bring people together in a way, because a lot of this stuff, it's to a degree about accessibility. Like, by doing this, you're reaching a whole new group of people that might not have been reached by it previously.
Potentially. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the hope. I mean, I want to share some more context here. So, like, I had the opportunity to study with an amazing Cuban saxophonist called Luis Dennis, who lives in Toronto,
Mhm.
and from studying with him, I had a gig and I played this song Seeds on the gig, and I showed him the chart, and I had originally had the the um the Latin section written on the chart as like a mambo groove.
Oh, okay.
And he was like, you know what, maybe you shouldn't say mambo here.
Huh.
And so it was good to get that feedback from somebody who's from Cuba, you know,
Yeah.
and because there's that idea of I guess appropriation. And
Yeah.
I'm not using that in a negative way, but it was good to get the feedback from somebody from Cuba,
Yeah.
who could really guide me.
You were able to give it, like, I'll call it like a culturally informed perspective.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
And that's
So
good, because I think that kind of stuff helps us all to learn and further our understanding with this sort of thing. I mean, especially like just looking at jazz as a tradition, like
mhm,
jazz is obviously a historically Black tradition.
mhm.
And there are a lot of, I don't know, there's something here to be said about the oh, there's a word I'm looking for here, but like the basically like the turning of like the jazz tradition into like a strictly academic art, and to think that someone can just go to university, study jazz theory
Right.
for 4 years and come out a musician. You know, it's not really, you know,
Right.
there's a bit more to it than that.
Yes, definitely. And if you would permit me to give a bit of a segue here, that
Yeah,
exact
absolutely.
idea is why I created a saxophone podcast. It's called Keep Taking Ground.
Oh
And
man, I don't know you.
the,
I got to listen to that.
well, it just launched this week on Wednesday.
Oh, well,
The
there you
first
go.
first episode with Melissa Aldana was the guest on the episode, the first episode. But the idea is that I believe that award-winning and in-demand musicians, or I would even extend that to like the founding people of the tradition. They knew, because some of them are passed away now, and the ones living, they know some things that the rest of us don't yet know.
Yeah.
And sometimes people think that, if you go to school, you get a degree, then you're good,
Mm.
But what I'm trying to illuminate here is like the stories of these celebrated artists,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to shine a light on their perspectives and journeys, and then we can sort of like learn from that. Um, so I'm really excited to, I guess, to shed some light on those stories, because you're right. It's not just about going to school and getting a degree. It's about connecting with the humans that actually have dedicated their lives
Yeah.
to creating, playing, recording, creating the art form.
Yeah, and as much as like this show, I mean, Trading Fours, just to give you a bit of a background, I started this show last year at Laurier as a first year student because I found out that Laurier didn't have a jazz radio show. So I was like, I'm going to fill that gap. I'm going to play some jazz music on the show and talk about it. Because I mean, I played jazz music and listened to it and talk about it on my own. So why not do it on air? And this year I started to expand, and I said, why don't I start finding some interviews and see if I can talk to some people like jazz musicians and maybe some industry people like producers, so I can get a bit more background, because like most of my jazz knowledge came from reading about it and listening to it, but I hadn't really had that experience yet of talking to many people about it, because I don't, like, in terms of playing the saxophone, I don't do it as much as I used to, and I'm a bit off my game, I'll say, but getting the chance to speak to people who've been, who have differing like experiences and backgrounds in jazz, it's really helping me, and I think helping my listeners to get a more rounded perspective of the jazz world as a whole.
Right. Yeah. I think that's important, man.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so another thing about this album also introduced me to the lovely voice of Joanna Majoko, who I wish I knew about her earlier, because she's fantastic. And I don't actually have a question for you here. I just wanted to thank you for working with such great musicians and putting out such a good album, because I've already listened to it like a few times over, and I think I'm going to be listening to it for a long time to come.
Man, that made my day. Thank you so much, man. Yeah, Joanna is amazing. And if you would permit me to just kind of say some of the names of the people on that song.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So UN Fancom on piano, amazing young pianist out of Toronto. I had 3 guitarists on the project: Sean Clary, Lucian Gray, and Andrew Mazzotto. On bass is Mark Rogers. On drums is David Richards, fellow Trinidadian as well, good friend. And on one track, there's a spoken word piece on Right to Be Wrong, and that's the voice of the amazing Brainerd Bryden Taylor. As you heard, Joanna Majoko on vocals, Nico Frangini Salvo on Nicholas on percussion on Seeds. And then the album is co-produced by a great friend and award-winning drummer Lionel Lewis.
Yeah, I saw that. That was the, I hate to say, that was the one name I knew out of the list. So seeing that was like, oh, wait a minute, Lionel Lewis, I know that name. But I definitely got to take a look into all these other people, because every time I listen to an album, it's like it's like when I listen to like an old like Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers album, it's like, all right, I know who's on here. I've listened to them before. But when I listen to like these new albums, it's like, I don't know anyone on here yet. And now I have like seven or eight new people who I can go look up and listen to all their music and find out who they've played with. So it's like roots spreading out. You get to learn about new people.
Definitely. Yeah.
Also, the next time you see Ewan, tell him that I heard that Love Supreme quote that he did on the SOTS Prelude. I heard that. Don't think he snuck that past me.
I'll tell him.
So I got to ask more about the tambourine drumming that is featured on this album by the Mount Cullen Tambourine Band. So this is my first time hearing the tambourine drum featured on a jazz recording or like at all. I never heard the instrument before. And I was immediately drawn to the sound of it because it's such like a warm, natural sound adding to the rest of the music. So tell me a bit about how you got together with Mount Cullen and how they ended up on the album.
So I got together with them last year, July. So I went back home, and I grew up on Trinidad, the island of Trinidad. But so I went to Tobago, and I spent a day with them. And this was all organized by an amazing pianist and really cultural giant in Tobago called John Arnold. And so he was the sort of like the liaison person that kind of reached out to the players for me. And so got together with them. We spent the day just kind of talking about the tradition and recording all the different rhythms that form the tradition. And then the second half of the day was we workshop the songs that they were going to play on, and then we recorded them. So it was a really enlightening and really fulfilling experience because when I originally started to study tambourine music, I couldn't find a lot of information online about it. And so I had a couple of YouTube videos, 2 articles written by, I think, like ethnomusicologists from like in the 90s. And that was pretty much it. So I was studying, I bought a group of, what do you call it, planar drums from Puerto Rico. So I could practice the rhythms myself and like actually learn them. And I decided to go with those drums because, you know, I live in Toronto and it's always pretty much cold half of the year here. So I needed to have drums that I could tune instead of having to heat them over fire because that's how tambourine drums are tuned.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's tuned
that's
over
really
like,
interesting.
Yeah, so like when we were at the session in Tobago, we had to take breaks during the day so that they can go back to the fire and reheat the drums.
Wow, are you serious?
Because it was being
that's
detuning.
crazy.
So it's really a form of music that started in colonial times, and it has remained like largely unchanged since then. So my process,
and that's and that's pretty amazing in and of itself. Like that's not a common occurrence, I'd say.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about that is that there's a small group of people in Tobago still carrying on this tradition, and for the most part, they're like related in some way, right? And so part of my goal here with, you know, working with the Mount Cullen tambourine band is that I want to keep this music alive, and I want to represent it to new audience, or present it to new audience, because like, you know, like you said, you never heard about it, you know.
Exactly.
And so workshopping the songs when we were at the session was a really important part of it, because for the most part, they've never played outside of their folk forms. And so they had to, and I had to figure out how to infuse the two things without, in a seamless way, without losing the
without it
essence.
kind of clashing.
Yes, yes. And so that was slightly challenging, but I think
It worked.
we worked through it. It worked, yeah. For the most part, it worked. And I have a desire to, my next project is going to be an album like totally dedicated to tambourine. So
Wow.
this album, it only has 3 tracks with tambourine.
Mm-hmm.
And my compositional approach was sort of adding the tambourine as an extra layer to the music.
Yeah.
But with this next project is going to be like totally focused on tambourine.
Like tambourine bass line, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. I'm definitely gonna have to give that a listen whenever that comes out, because
And
that sounds really cool.
I was gonna say each of the rhythms has like its own like cultural significance. There's a particular time to play a reel. There's a particular time to play a jig. There's a particular time that to use the brushback rhythm, which is the one that you hear on the right to be wrong, the slow ballad. So I want to also highlight sort of the cultural significance of each of those rhythms as well into the next project. So I had fun working with them.
It's definitely important to put it in that context. And we were talking earlier about religion a bit, and obviously religion plays a very important part in your life and in your music, especially as I noticed on songs like The Way and on Zambian Offertory, where, as you mentioned in the liner notes, is your interpretation of a sacred folk melody from the Poor Clare nuns of Zambia that you found while browsing online. So that was really interesting to me. I had to do some Googling to find out more about that. So could you tell me a bit about your religious upbringing in Port of Spain and how it sort of intersected with your musical upbringing?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Pentecostal church. And so, like I expressed earlier, much of the music that I was surrounded by in my community, whether it was like African folk drumming or steel pan music, excuse me, was considered secular. And I think I grew up in that same time where those walls were being broken down too, by different people. And I think I was privileged enough to join a church called Victory Christian Outreach, which is in Belmont, Port of Spain. Shout out to anybody from that church right now. They had a very open-minded arts director at the church. And so about the time when I was around 10 years old, she decided to start a steel pan band as part of the church. Which is it was about that time those things were beginning to happen, the acceptance of those folk forms within the church, and that those barriers of sacred and secular being broken down. And so I was the youngest person in the band. And so I think what happened for me was that it was kind of like the entryway into me breaking down those walls for myself and getting an opportunity to explore those different folk forms. And as you mentioned, Zambian Offertory. The song on the surface just kind of spoke to me. I love the melody, I love the vibe, and I had to dig deeper to figure out what exactly was resonating with me. And when I did some research, I realized, okay, I kind of saw in the video that they were nuns, but I didn't know anything about the sect of Poor Clare nuns. And so did some research about that. And I still had to think a little bit deeper. Okay, what is it about this is resonating with me? And it's the idea that, again, growing up in the 90s, folk forms, particularly of African folk forms, and the way that a lot of times that religion has been presented in the West is very Eurocentric.
Yes.
And so those two things didn't always mix. And so for me, it was interesting that the Pork-leg nuns of Zambia were able to preserve their folk forms while sort of embracing the Roman Catholicism.
Right.
And that was unique. That was unique because in the church in the Caribbean, a lot of times the folk forms were pushed out.
Yeah, it's like there's a clear separation there.
Yeah, and so for me, I lived on that line, growing up in the church. I lived on that line, and for a long time, I mean, this caused me a lot of anxiety trying to figure out how am I going to be engaged in all of the communities that I'm a part of without me offending one community.
Right.
And so the song Zambian Offertory represents that ideal for me. And I'm happy that I've in some ways be able to be authentic in terms of who I am as a person and express some of the things that I believe through my music, and also pursue musical passions,
Yeah, and so, I mean that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you're able to express who you are through your music, that's one of the most important things, I think, because if someone's able to do that, then a lot of the other stuff falls to the wayside. Like even if someone is expressing themselves really well through music, and maybe some of the skill, some of the talent isn't there, it's still good to listen to. But someone's got both, and someone's got like that, and someone's got that background. It's like, oh man, that's a whole nother level.
There's an extra layer to that I really believe that there's so much music out there.
Yeah,
and there are so many amazing projects, amazing musicians, composers, producers. There's so much out there. But with my music, my hope is to add some what I would call like nutritional value to the music, so that I'm not just presenting music, but I'm presenting ideas that I think
you're presenting life.
Yes, and for instance, for example, Big Old Shoes, Right to Be Wrong, Seeds, those three songs in particular, I present ideas. So like Big Old Shoes, I'm presenting the idea of being patient and maybe I should give some more context there. So Big Old Shoes is a song written based off of a children's story that I'm writing. I'm working on a children's
Oh my God, really? That's amazing.
And the name of the book is, I won't say that right now, but
I got it.
So the main story is, the moral of the story is that there's this boy from the island of Tobago, and his name is Ben. And he loves to dance. He's going to be part of the Tobago Heritage Festival, which is a annual festival held in Tobago. And he needs new shoes for the festival because he has these big old shoes that his brother like hand-me-down shoes. And and he's going around the village telling everybody that he meets, I'm going to be in this festival. I'm so excited. I'm going to get new shoes, or I need new shoes. Look at me dance. He shows them some dance moves, and he's a horrible dancer. And so basically they keep telling him, Ben, before you get new shoes, you need to get new feet. And that Ben really represents me, because I went through a period of my life because I studied in Boston at Berkeley, had to go back home for a bit. And that period of 3 years being back home in Trinidad was an anxiety-filled 3 years of my life, because I had tasted being an environment where I was constantly inspired and surrounded by music giants, really. And then I had to move back home to an environment that wasn't as stimulating. And so I wanted new shoes, so to speak, right? And but the reality is, and in some ways, because I had experienced it, I felt as though I had the right to have access to that, and it was owed to
Right.
me to have access to that.
Yeah, like you deserved it after having like the
Yes.
taste. Yeah.
Yes, I felt like if I deserved it, and so there was some like personal conflict and tension. And what I realized during that time was that I didn't deserve anything, and also if I was going to accomplish anything that I wanted to accomplish, I would have to do the work
Hmm.
and develop myself. And as I develop and I grow into the space that's in the old shoe, then I'll naturally outgrow the shoes and I'll get new ones. So that's kind of the idea of like big old shoes. So again, I love opportunities like this to chat with folks like you, because that's kind of the intention. Like the music is a thing on its own, and
Hmm.
you could enjoy it that way. But then I also want it to be conversation points, because I think that these ideas help people to evolve.
Yeah.
It's helped
And
me to evolve.
I think I when I do interviews, I like to play a song before the interview and I like to play a
Hmm.
song after. So I think before I'm going to play Seeds just because we talked about it a bit earlier, and then
Hmm.
after, I think just for context, I'm going to play Big Old Shoes just so that everyone
Amazing.
can hear it with a fresh point of view.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
All right, I got one or two more quick questions for you.
Okay. Hmm.
So I was struck by the presence of the interludes on the album because
Hmm.
I'm a lifelong fan of hip hop and I'm no
Hmm.
stranger to like the vocal skits and the interludes.
Yeah.
But hearing it on a jazz album was
Hmm.
sort of new to me. So could you tell me a bit about how that like came to be?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I know a bunch of records, like jazz records, that have interludes on them, usually
Oh,
from
okay.
more modern jazz musicians.
Yeah.
And I feel as though that tradition that has been like borrowed from the hip hop tradition too, because it's like it's a thing. Because I'm thinking back to some of the albums I've heard it on, and it's usually um, younger um, musicians that are like African American,
Hmm.
and no doubt I think they would have been influenced by the hip hop tradition as well. So yeah, so I liked the idea of presenting the music in like a story, like the full album as a
Yeah.
story, and just having those interludes help to add some more context to the music. So for example, the Right to Be Wrong prelude.
Hmm.
So again, that presents the idea of how love covers um, covers faults, or the inadequacies of the people that you love,
That's very true.
Yeah, and so the song is a thing of its own, but I felt as though because of the potency of the idea, I wanted to add some
Need
spoken word.
some context.
Yes, some more context for it. So I wanted to add that little prelude on it, so that
Yeah.
when you hear the melody, you're listening with totally different ears.
I like that a lot because
Right.
like the sort of that context it's definitely important. I mean, for some people will listen to an album and they'll just say this music sounds good, but
Mm-hmm,
I'm one of those people who likes to know everything about an album. I like to read it and listen
mm-hmm,
to it several times and
mm-hmm,
analyze it when I can. So having these kind of things, it's like if reading if like listening to an album is like reading a book, having these little interludes is like having like spark notes or like a study guide that helps like lead you
right,
through it and gain a better
right.
understanding.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I really like that.
yeah.
And you talk a bit in the liner notes about how this album was created to, as you say, explore your passion for composing, performing, and recording music that celebrates both your Trinbagonian heritage and your love for the jazz tradition. And I
Mm-hmm.
found that really inspiring myself. So could you tell me a bit more about the creation of the album itself? And you obviously been playing music for a while, but at what point did you sit down and say, okay, it's time to record an album? Like it's time to put something on wax.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because it was a long process. It started back when I say some of the music was actually written before I moved to Canada.
Oh,
So
wow.
like that's like plus 7 years ago. And so it had been in my mind in some ways. And I played some of this music on like my final recital at Humboldt College
Mm.
in Toronto. And then I put a group together. And then I started to try to book, gigs here and there. And so we played the music for about 2 years. And I'm really happy that we had the opportunity to do that, because I would say that I'm really happy with my development as a composer and arranger. I think I'm still trying to play catch up with my ability as like a player, And so it gave me some time to develop ideas over the tunes. And then as a group, because, over the 2 years, sometimes I'd have different musicians play, and they would add something to the music as well.
Yeah, it's like a constant, like it's like a potluck. Everyone brings something to the table.
Definitely. So that helped the music to develop. And then I knew that I wanted to record the music and put out an album. I was originally going to put out the recording that I had upon graduating from Humber, because part of Humber's program is that you have a fourth-year recording project, and you
really
essentially create like pretty much an album at the end of it.
And
so I was going to put that out, but then I wasn't totally happy with it, and I'm glad that I didn't put it out. So in terms of the process of recording, the music was written, we knew the tune, so it's just a matter of deciding, like putting a group together. And once I did that, I knew that I needed some support to get everything like on the production side. So that's when I, spoke with Lionel, and he decided to come on board. I feel like I might be missing the question. Am I?
No. I mean, the question was more like, at what point did it click in your mind that like I need to record an album? Like at what point did you decide I'm going to record an album and put it out there?
Yeah, I mean that was the intention from the beginning.
Right. Okay.
That I want to record the music and put it out. And it just took a while because I was self-funding the album.
Yeah, I mean these things take time.
Yeah, and then I did get some support from some crowdfunders. So shout out to all the crowdfunders that contributed to the production cost of this project. Yeah, that was always the intention, to record it and put it out. So I feel like if as a musician I need to be putting out music, and for a long I've been writing and composing for like a while. So
yeah. And so Bridges is out on is it December 4th? Is it? Am I getting that date right? December 4th on Fwé Culture. Is it available? So it's available on Bandcamp. Where can people get at the album?
Spotify, iTunes, Bandcamp, from my website, Jesse Ryan Music that's spelled MUZIK.com. And I'm printing some CDs as well. Some people still like physical CDs. So
if you end up printing a vinyl copy, I'll definitely pick up a copy because.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about that last night. I'm probably going to do a short run of vinyl sometime next year.
I'll definitely be looking out for that because I have a little collection. Yours is one I'd like to add.
Amazing. Thanks, man.
So, all right, just wrapping up here. What do you? What's next for Jesse Ryan? What's next for you? I know you mentioned you were working on that children's book. You mentioned the new album with the tambourine focus.
Yeah. as you're aware, I'm just involved in like many different projects. So I have like
Yeah.
the next 2 to 3 years of projects really planned out.
Wow.
I shouldn't say planned out because I have it forecasted with what it's going to look like and so on. And so I think what's next is continuing to work on those projects, whether it's composing new music. I talked about the next project I'm putting out, focusing on timbring. I'm working with I'm currently writing a suite of music for a large ensemble. It's like jazz quintet, string quartet, and a 20 voice chorale.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
And that should be coming out around May next year. I'm working with an amazing
I gotta listen to that. That sounds great.
In Toronto. Thanks, man. So some of the music is already written. So I'm still in the process of writing some of it. So that's next. Continuing on the art and design side, I'm continuing to do more art and design projects at the side. Working on some children's books and children's content as well, and then continuing to work on my podcast.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, trying to stay healthy as well.
Yeah, trying to stay safe,
inspired.
trying to stay alive and stay well during COVID. Everything's crazy out here, and I hope you and yours are staying safe and being okay.
I have been, I have been for the most part, and I think the thing that has helped me get through this period is trying to lower my expectations, really, and just to the essentials. So if I have a place to live, if I have something to eat, I have good health, and I have outlets to be creative, and of course my loved ones are safe, and even that sometimes is a lot to ask for in some situations, but for the most part, that's been good,
I don't know how the corporate world tried to push this idea on us that, because it's quarantine, there's so much free time, we have to be so much more productive. That's like, we're living in a pandemic, man. Like, you got to give us a break with this sort of thing, or else we're here. Yeah,
and I've had the chance to chat with different people about how they've been dealing with it, and everybody's handling it in their own way. For me, because of I tend to thrive, sorry, not thrive. I tend to thrive when there's some kind of adversity happening around me. And so, as I mentioned, I finally registered my business and all that. It's just I've been working non-stop since March on different projects.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
All right. Is there anything you want to say to the people, to the listeners, or to the world? Anything
well, I want to say thank you to you, for your interest in the project, and I think this was a great conversation. I really love opportunities like this to share the ideas and this context.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you for coming on and talking to me about it.
Yeah, and my hope is that people listen to the music and it stays with them enough for them to explore and seek out some more context about what the album is about. And I know that.
I hope so too.
Yeah,
because
ideas.
Or
sorry, man, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, just saying, I hope that the ideas help people to evolve, that they really sit with them and think about. At the very least, I'm trying to inspire thought.
That's wonderful, man. That's great. And I think that it really will.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. And other than that, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Same here, man. Thanks so much.